afternoon，大家各位好，我是邓洪律师，欢迎收看这一集的邓洪说法。今天我们有一个特别贵宾，所以的话，我们是用英文来采访他。Today we have a special guest in our legal show. We're inviting some of my friends and some of the community leaders. And today I have an honor to introduce a good friend of mine, one of the best civil rights attorney, by the name of Brian Dunn. Brian, for the last 2 years, have been winning 11 jury trial in civil rights case, 6 federal civil rights case in the federal court. And he had been named one of the best civil rights attorney in the whole country. American Trial Lawyer Association had named him top 100 trial lawyers since 2008. And he had been one of the, whenever high-profile case, you could see that, he is the one who come out and fighting for the victims of the crime. And one of the cases that he had been working on, many people realize that, in the legal area, there's a case called Young versus City of Sacramento. In that case, California Supreme Court ruled that the police department should be responsible for all the misconduct and abuse happening in the jail facility. And who won the case? It was Brian Dunn. So let me introduce my good friends, Brian Dunn.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's such an honor to be on the program. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. We've been, I'm in my 26th year now of doing this work. And it just seems like it's gone by in an instant. Our time together has been wonderful. I especially want to alert everyone who's listening to the fact that Daniel Ding and I worked together to pursue justice for the family of Li Shi Wang, which still, in all of my years, remains one of the worst police shootings I've ever seen. But if there's ever a silver lining, we got to work with Dr. Henry Lee.
Yes.
Who's always been an idol of mine, and we were able to get a really good settlement relatively quickly for the family. And while nobody wants it this way, we at least can ensure ourselves that they're probably not going to do this to somebody else.
Yeah, when I remember when the Chinese Mr. Wang came to me because his father was shot in a marijuana house. At that time, we wanted to have the best attorney on for fighting for the family. So through another good friend of us by the name of Tom Girardi, he is one of the biggest lawyers in the country, one of the most influential. And you know what? Tom recommend we should team up with Brian. He is one of the best in police brutality. For the last year, we've been working hand in hand. I could see that Brian, why he's so successful. Initially, the insurance company said, you know what? This Chinese client, he doesn't have, he's not American citizen. He's living in a marijuana house. He might be possibly involved with the marijuana growth operation. Remember, he was just showing.
I remember that craziness.
That's a maximum you could get is $250,000. So, I do not know, how, when we were in the mediation and all that, believe me, you could see the calibers that Brian bringing to the table.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
The other side respect that. The arbitrator saying, we're talking about Brian Dunn, the Cochran law firm. So that's the Cochran law firm. Johnny Cochran is the big name in the country. So that's the reason, we've been very honored to have a chance to work with the Cochran law firm in a lot of cases. Besides the case, we talk about, when we hang out together, we talk about the cases, we all talk about the legal issues, evidence, and all that kind of things. I never have a chance to sit down with Brian to talk about some of the background. Now this is times we could chat and talk about, why he become a lawyer, why he enjoy, why he enjoy, why he choose civil rights, those kind of things.
Well, so Brian, Daniel, if you want to know, really, it's for these kinds of relationships. It's for Li Shi Wang. It's for you. And when we look at the situation in terms of what happened to Mr. Wang, the things that are happening in the Chinese community are very similar very similar to the things that have happened in the Black community.
Yes.
Not just presently, but you go back 100 years, go back 150 years.
That's
Some
true.
of the very first acts of formal discrimination by the United States government were called the Chinese Exclusion Acts.
Yes. 1882, Chinese Exclusion Act.
1882, yeah.
Yes.
And that was something that was specifically targeting the Chinese immigrants in an effort to have them have less rights and less access to justice.
Yes.
And, you have this idea that has been entrenched in the American consciousness of the yellow peril or the yellow fever. It's very similar to all of the stereotypes and the biases that have been put on Black people in this country. And you fast forward to today.
Yes.
Even in 2020, the Chinese community is being treated incredibly unfairly. The president has called the COVID-19 virus, Chinese virus. There have been a ripple effect throughout the country to where the average person in a poll said, they think the Chinese government may be responsible or Chinese people may be responsible. And not only is it untrue, nothing could be further from the truth, but it fosters a mindset of inhumanity. It fosters a mindset that doesn't see the Chinese people as being American, being part of the family, being on the same level that a white American may be. And that's all of the reasons why I do this, all of the reasons why you do this.
Yes.
And it's been such an honor to work with the Chinese community.
We share the similar philosophy. And I mean, that's the reason we go into the law. I remember you once saying that, the real lawyer changed the world. Yeah. And I still remember that, how we're going to use the legal knowledge, our expertise to help our people. I remember, in 1964, Congress and the president signed the Civil Rights Act.
Right. And
our Chinese American was benefiting from that one, even though it's African American who go, who fight for it. But as a matter of fact,
we are together.
We're together.
Yes.
So we had a lot of similarity. I remember during the time when Dr. Henry Lee was a consultant for Johnny Cochran and O.J. Simpson's case. I have a chance to talk to Dr. Lee, and then I asked because Dr. Lee was helping O.J. Simpson as a defense expert.
Right.
A lot of people saying that why we want to help an African American, and Dr. Lee saying that Chinese American, African American, we're brothers.
We're brothers.
We shared a lot of background, as you mentioned.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that now growing up, what's your life experience? What inspired you to become a lawyer?
Well, Daniel, it's no one reason. I mean, I was born in 1968, so this year I'm 52 years old. When I grew up in Los Angeles, and it was, obviously a very different time then than it is now.
Yes.
My parents met at the University of Texas in Austin. They were two of the first Black people that they let into the university.
Wow.
And they said, the racism is so bad in Texas. They got married, and for their honeymoon, they drive to Los Angeles. They say, we got to get away from this.
Yes.
So they come to Los Angeles, and it's the same thing.
Yes.
It's a lot of the first person that rented them an apartment, because he was literally blind. He couldn't see. He was blind.
Wow.
And, he was going off of their application, and they both had good credit. But when the man's wife came home, it was, she was yelling at him, but it was too late. But that's just one small example. The community did not welcome him. And, there's one thing to say, okay, I live here. I have a mailing address here, but it's a whole other thing to say, I'm welcome. You're welcome here, and you can know that your community is going to be accepted and safe.
Yeah.
And that's been a struggle for your people and my people. But in terms of my life, one of the ways that as African Americans, we continued to feel the sting of racism, that continued to feel alienated, was by the way that we were treated by the police, and by the way that we were treated by law enforcement. And it's something that I first learned about when I was only 9 years old. I was 9 years old. My father drove a Lincoln Continental, which was kind of a nice car. He was an engineer, pretty successful. And I was sitting on the car, and this was in Culver City, and the police came, and I was waiting for him to come out, and they shined the light on me, and we're really going slow. I was 9 years old.
Yes.
And I said, "What do you think? I'm trying to steal this car?" No, that's probably not a very smart thing to say. I learned later.
Yeah.
But, you know, they really beat the crap out of me for that. And he took his gun out, and the gun is, you know, pressed right up on my head. And, you know, these are things I never forgot.
Yeah.
And, you know, I now know what he did was contrary to every form of police procedure that exists. It was just completely illegal what he did.
Yes.
But it left a mark. It left a mark on me that kind of just never left. And, you know, when we were going through, I was forced to go to church every Sunday and Saturday, and I hated it. Okay, I didn't really like church very much. But what was our church was the pastor was Reverend Lawson. James Lawson was someone who worked very closely with Martin Luther King.
Yes.
So I'm sitting, you know, in the chair, you know, in the pew at church against my will. I just want to go play. But what he's talking about is civil rights, and he's talking about how our struggle is every bit as important as the struggle for any person anywhere who's fighting for human rights. And all of these things kind of just got drilled into my head. I now look Reverend Lawson, I say, thank you very much. Because those are all of the things that turned me into someone that wanted to dedicate his life to justice.
Yes.
And as time went on, I started to realize that it's very common. There's a lot of commonality between what I was going through and what Latino Americans were going through, what Korean Americans were going through, what Chinese, what everyone was going through. The hostility, the meanness, the idea that people look at you funny, but just little things that just, they eat away at you. You know, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here.
Yeah.
But the overall effect is, you know, it messes with your confidence. It messes with your ability to feel like you have a part of the American dream, the part of America. And what's so ironic is my people built this country. Your people built this country. The labor and everything that we were forced to do, they wouldn't have had the railroads without Chinese labor. They wouldn't have had any form of economic stability from the cotton trade without slave labor.
Yes.
So we are Americans. Our ancestors suffered so we could be Americans. Our ancestors gave us the right to be Americans. And there is this underlying thought that, well, American means you have to be white. And that's really just not true. And sometimes it could take a lifetime for a person to really realize that.
Yeah. Well, during my reporter years, I was fortunate to have a chance to interview Johnny Cochran. And he was working as a prosecutor in the district attorney's office. And if he continued working there, he could rise up, to be the district attorney. But rather, he quit his job and become a criminal defense lawyer. And later on, he started civil rights practice, and I think, that he said, I need to change the system. And I know you, since you graduated from Berkeley and then you went on to Michigan University, the law school in University of Michigan, and later on come back. And I think in 1982, you were lucky to have a chance to working for Johnny.
Yeah, 92. I started in 92 when I was in my second year of law school. And it wasn't like, we weren't in this office. We were in a much smaller office.
Yes.
It was a much, it wasn't as prestigious. He wasn't a nationally known figure. he was very, very popular in LA, but he wasn't national. It was before OJ, and even before OJ, it was Michael Jackson. Before Michael Jackson, it was Reginald Denny, and I worked on the Reginald Denny case. But
yes,
it was something. I mean, because you take a constitutional law class, and they say, okay, Fourth Amendment protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures. Fourth Amendment is a constitutional law, and you think about it in a book. But these are things that happen to people on the street.
Yes,
it's not just in books. But it's in the street. Now, all of the professors that taught me at Michigan, they said Michigan was a top law school.
Yes.
They're very good professors, but they don't know anything about practicing lawyer. They don't know anything about law.
Yes.
And when I met Johnny Cochran for the first time, this is what it was, the things that I was being taught in school about the Constitution and constitutional law. He was actually applying those principles to the lives of real people.
Yes.
And I always had a particular issue when it came to police brutality and police misconduct. And that was what he was doing. And so I fit in perfectly there. It wasn't a big flamboyant operation, though.
Yes.
And we lost a lot of cases because we just couldn't get jurors to agree with us. It wasn't because we were bad lawyers. Mm-hmm. We just had a lot of trouble because the inertia of the past was bringing it in.
Yes.
And it was an odd thing. I mean, Johnny Cochran wore a purple suit. He dressed differently than anyone I'd ever seen. He was a very flamboyant guy. And I was taught to be very humble. I was taught to be very, if you're in the room, don't let, I was taught never be flashy, don't drive a nice car, don't wear nice, and he's the exact opposite. He drives Rolls Royce. He's got rings on all the fingers, the jewelry. He's got the tie,
Yeah.
And he'd wear a suit that is purple or he'd wear a white suit. And I'm like, wow. But then when you see him in court, it's power. I remember feeling chills. I would see him because he had so much power and so much faith.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, I want to be like that. That's what I want to be like. And it's just so funny, Daniel, because it's like when I started, no one ever could have imagined what would happen in the next, it was like 3 years.
Yes.
And then it went to be where he couldn't walk outside the door without a mob getting his autograph.
Well,
and
I think
this is the same guy that I was working with.
Yes.
But he never changed up here. He never changed in terms. He was still very down to earth.
Yes.
And the thing is, Daniel.
Yes.
He liked me for some reason.
He
wanted me. And it's a very special thing when someone sees something in you, or they want something in you, or they want. Now, it's still very, very touching to me because I didn't think I was anything special at all. I didn't think that I was that great. I only thought about what was wrong.
Yes.
And he used to tell his wife, he never told me, but he'd tell his wife, that guy, Brian Dunn, is going to be very special one day. You watch, he's going to be very special.
Yeah.
And we lost him in 2005. And I had started to win. I'd started to do some little things, but it was still, I feel like, I wish you could have seen what I could do now. I wish you could have seen my power, what I can do. And his wife said he knew. It just brings a chill. He said he knew all along.
Yes.
How could he know? But anyway, that's very
well, I'm glad because after he passed away, he passed the torch to you.
Well, I had to fight for the torch. It wasn't like he passed it. I mean, we all had to fight for it, but it turned out the way that it had to turn out. But
so now, you're the one who's had the Johnny Cochran law firm. But one of the things, let me tell you a little bit anecdote, Brian. When first would have this case, and I deal with the police department, and so I make an appointment. He said, I'm going to supposed to meet with the sergeant on the department, and then you could not come, and you send Danielle, your assistant, to go along with that. So with the police department, when I got there, they would keep us waiting, and then they say, who else going to be meeting with the sergeant? Okay, well, my name, I give it to them. And Danielle light up a car, Cochran Law Firm. And then sergeant is saying, you together? I said, yes. I said, okay. They said, let me wait. So they go and get the lieutenant. And lieutenant come back and said, are you sure you're working with Johnny, Cochran law firm? I said, yeah, we're working with them. We're together. And then they said, and the lieutenant come back, and then getting the captain come back with the chief. So you can see it when you show the car, Cochran law firm, the police are afraid to deal with you guys. How do you build up that kind of reputation? I mean, I'm sure throughout the courtroom, I mean, there's, what they call good old boys club. How are you going to break? I mean, for the last 20-some years.
The thing is, though, in that case, they knew that they did something wrong. Okay, that was a terrible shooting, and they knew it. I think one of the reasons I heard something about they went to New York to try to get Mr. Wang's son to, maybe sign off or whatever. But it's a very different position of power when you know you did something wrong. Okay.
Yes.
Now, one of the things most people don't really know is that the majority of police are good people. The majority. And it's just that nobody ever really thinks about the good things they do. What happens, they get news because of the bad things that the police do. And I've gotten over the years, I've become pretty well known. And I've gotten a lot of anonymous calls from cops who have told me where to look or told me and these are cops.
Yes.
Or who have told me the place that has the evidence because you think there's a code of silence, and there is a code of silence, but there's a saying that nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. It's a saying. And the idea is that we're not anti-law enforcement. We're not against the police. We're against the police that violate the Constitution. We're against the breaking of the laws. We believe everyone should be on the same level. And there are many police officers that are outraged when they see acts of brutality. They're outraged when they see a murder by another police officer, but they can't say anything. So in many ways, I'm their voice. I gave a seminar once in it was 2009. 500 police, 500 police, all there. And I got a standing ovation. And it was very, very, they all wanted to talk to me afterwards. They sent me emails afterwards. I ended up, a couple of people became expert witnesses from that one talk. You would think, that, they're going to hate me. But it was the exact opposite. Yes.
Now, when you're dealing with the police, one of the things that, we understand we have the rights, but sometimes the police is the one who probably, without camera, they could do a lot of things, code of silence, things like that. I think, Ronnie King's case, you could see, without the video, nobody would know. I mean, would go on.
Very good point. Very true. Very good point.
But at the same time, a lot of people, the jury, they tend to believe the police officer. They say they get a tough job, and the police is trained to go home in one piece. Now, how are you going to overcome a lot of people? They tend to believe the police because a lot, even in the Chinese juror, sometimes we have, even for the Chinese juror, they were saying that, without this kind of, without the kind of things, how are we going to do something like that, And,
I mean, you're absolutely right, Daniel. And you think we're the contemporary lawyers. We have these struggles. Think about what our grandfathers went through.
Yes.
And think about what their fathers went through.
Yes.
Now, when you think about all of that, maybe what we're dealing with is not so bad compared to what they're dealing with.
Yes.
But if you look at everything, the most frustrating thing for me is what you just said. I mean, when I was probably the first 15 years, maybe 15 to 20 years, we were coming up against so much social, I call it inertia. Racism is not exactly accurate, but it's just the way of thinking things. It could be an Asian person, black person, white person. People don't want to believe the police lie. And for me, it's obvious because I've seen my whole life they've been lying. But for the average person, they haven't seen it through the lens that I've seen. And it was very hard for me, Daniel. Very hard.
Yes.
what do? I have a guy who was shot in the back.
Yes.
A T shot. A T is like, how a T?
Mm-hmm.
That means a 90, there's no angle this way and there's no angle this way. He's shot in the back and killed. And the officer, there's no angle. He's saying he was facing me. I thought he was going to pull a gun on me. And he says he was facing me when I shot him. And the coroner says you shot him in the back.
Wow.
You think case closed. Okay,
yeah.
Let's go home. It's over with. Mail it in.
Yes.
And you go through and the jury says no excessive force.
Yes.
After a 2-week trial. And I'm sitting next to the guy's mother the whole time.
Yes.
And she sees everything that happens.
Yeah.
And I know I did an okay job, but I talked to the jurors afterwards and they say, well, he must have done something wrong. Or the officer wouldn't have shot him.
Yes.
And then you say, well, I wouldn't run from the police. My kids don't run from the police. If you run from the police,
you might have done something wrong, right?
Yeah, but that's not the law. The law says you have to have, an unreasonable threat in order for deadly force. But all of these things, Daniel, you internalize it. What do? It's very stressful, very frustrating.
Yeah.
You drink, what do? You're frustrated, howl at the moon, but you always get up the next day.
Yes.
And you say, okay, we got to do, you just somehow keep going. And, when I look back on all of those years, it was so frustrating. And it really made me feel disheartened.
Yeah.
And I felt as if, what am I doing? Because it wasn't about money or anything. I mean, nobody likes to lose, but what do I tell the mother?
Yeah.
Because she now lost twice. She lost her son and then she lost again in the courtroom. And I was really down one day. I'll tell you this story.
Mm-hmm.
One of the great human rights victories was the African-American struggle against civil rights violations in the 50s.
Yes.
You talked about the Civil Rights Act of 64. We had the Voting Rights Act of 65.
Yes.
These are things that were very hard, and people were getting killed. People were losing their lives out there.
Yes.
But now it looks like it's obviously the right thing to do.
Yes.
But Reverend Lawson came to the office because he came for my pastor. He came for something else, and we were talking. And he said to me, "You look really bad. You look down." And I don't remember what year. This was probably late 90s. And he told me that he said, "Come here, let me talk to you for a minute."
Okay.
And he said, "We're with Martin Luther King, and go back to the 50s, and we didn't know what to do. We just knew everything was wrong. We knew the lynchings were wrong. We knew it was wrong that our wives couldn't go to the same stores that white wives could go to. We knew it was wrong that we had to sit in the back of the bus.
Yes.
But we didn't know what to do about it. We just knew it was wrong. And we were all ministers. We don't carry guns. We don't have no army. We're preachers."
Yes.
So we just figured somehow, well, let's boycott the buses. Let's march. And he said, if you look in history makes it look like we knew what we were doing. He said, history makes it look like we decided that we were going to do this and it worked and everything worked. And he said, when we were doing it, we were terrified. We didn't know. You have to have a belief that there's something larger than you that will come to your aid. And you also have to have a belief in justice.
Yes.
And you have to have a belief that the right thing eventually will happen. And he said, but the thing I want to tell you more than anything else is that the same way you're looking, that's the way we used to look. Because we just didn't know. We were stumbling, like trying to grab. And eventually all of these things happened. Rosa Parks happened.
Yes.
The bus boycott, all of the marches on, and we got the I Have a Dream, and we got the national intention.
Yes.
And the history books made it look like we had a game plan, and the history books made it look like we had everything up here, but we didn't know. We knew nothing. All we had was faith.
Yes.
And he's right. He was right. He's right. Because
I think the same thing happened with John Lewis. I mean, he did not know what he was doing, and he thinks, we want to do the right things, And
it's very scary too, because a lot of people were dying,
Yes.
They would kill you. I mean, they would take you out, they'll lynch you.
Yes.
And it was so toxic.
Yes.
You get cracked on the head. I think he got his skull cracked.
Yeah.
I mean, the people that were attacking them were murderous. I mean, you look in the eye and there's black. They just, they want to kill you.
Yes.
And it's very, for a peaceful soul like us, we're peaceful men.
Yes.
Well, just to have that is very hard. Yes.
Yeah. One of the things, a lot of people wonder, Brian and Daniel, some of your clients, they don't have a job. They might be involved with drugs and things like that. Why are you fighting so hard for them? What is in there? What's the point? If they're a drug dealer and there's something involved with any criminal elements, they should be punished. But,
right.
What do you, why do you think that, you would kill, you and I doesn't care. What kind of work they do. We care. There's a human right, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, you think of it as a person evil because they break the law.
Yeah.
Now, there's people that are doing time in prison now for selling marijuana, and it's legal.
Yeah.
Right now, it's legal, but it was illegal when they were doing it. But
yes,
you look at it like this is every person, not just this person. And a lot of our folks were breaking the law when they were killed. A lot of our folks were exercising poor judgment when they were killed. They were running from the police when they were killed. But it makes no difference. And if you really understand the law and you understand life, every life is sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these guys are not too old. They're young. Now, I don't know about you, but I was an idiot when I was 22 years old, 23 years old. I mean, totally different than I am now. It's a miracle I even survived,
Yeah.
And lower than that, it was really, I don't even talk about it. It's crazy, the maturity. But if you commit a crime, Daniel, in our system of justice, as crazy as it sounds, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Yes.
And it's very important because the death penalty rarely happens in California.
Yes.
And even then, so if you say, okay, this person was on drugs, they're running from the police, they're wanted, they have warrants. If they have broken the law, they should be judged in a courtroom, innocent until proven guilty, judged by a jury and by a judge. If you kill that person on the street, you take everything from him. You take all of his rights, you take everything he has ever had, everything he ever will have, you take away from him. And he'll never get his day in court.
Yes.
It's just death penalty right there. There's no appeal. And the average person for many years thought it's okay.
Yes.
It's just, it doesn't matter. It's just he's breaking the law. It doesn't matter. But I'm looking at his mother. I'm in the house of his family.
Mm-hmm.
I am holding his mother who is crying in my arms.
Yes.
And she knows it's horrible. Not only will she never see her son again, but nothing's going to happen to the man that did it. I mean, if her son gets killed in gang violence, at least the police are looking for the shooter. But here, the police are the person. So that pain is really, you think about it. And if you're an empathetic person, I feel too much sometimes.
Yes.
I feel it.
Yes.
And I still think about all of that.
Yes.
When I sleep, I think about the faces of the individuals.
Yes.
And you also think about, why does it happen?
Yes.
It happens because of, you could say, man's inhumanity to man. It's cruelty.
Yes.
The person with the gun knows that the person he's shooting at is unarmed.
Yes.
But he's angry. Maybe he feels disrespected and he says, I'm going to teach this person a lesson. Very cruel.
Yes. Very
cruel and very inhuman. But it happens. And when I get them in deposition, they all, I was in fear for my life. I have to go home to my family out of fear. But out there on the street, they're, it's a totally different person.
Yes.
So sometimes you get a videotape and you can prove that.
I mean, that's the reason, when we see in the news that, the one who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, he had 18 complaints against him, lodged against him, but he's still out in the street. I'm sure, some of the cases you've bumped into, this officer have such bad record, but they
sometimes
still...
they do, and sometimes they don't. And there is one thing I got to say, though.
Yes.
An officer can pick up a complaint for doing all... It doesn't necessarily mean that the officer did the thing. Yes. People file complaints against officers sometimes for no reason. If the complaint is sustained or if the complaint is upheld, that's a big thing. That's different. But the idea is that some of these officers have long histories. But I'm going to tell you something most people don't know, Daniel. Most of the shooters, and I've had over 200 people I've represented, most of the people who kill is the first time they've ever done it. And most of the time, it is a person that, for that moment in time, they suspended all of their training, they suspended all of their morality. And even the person seemed good, they were very evil in that moment. And it's a much difficult thing. It's much more difficult than, because a lot of people want to believe it's the same cops over and over again.
Yes.
That's not always the case. In fact, that's the minority. Usually it's someone who is caught up in an emotion, the officer's caught up in emotion, and he has the gun.
Yes.
And it's a combination of anger, feeling disrespected, sometimes fear.
Yes.
But they have all of the power when they have that gun.
Now, sometimes in a lot of states, they have qualified immunity. You cannot file a lawsuit against a police officer. And sometimes why you choose, what kind of legal theory will you use for 1983 action, or filing a lawsuit against the city or the police department? What kind of legal cause of action will you take against their employers?
That's a very good question. And the answer is everything. We throw everything at them. We throw federal causes of action. We throw state law causes of action. We have, over the years, we've developed a product for pursuing these cases. And it's just like, we always try to get a little better next time, and we try to clean it up. But the product that we have now has been very successful for us, even through trials. I mean, 80% trial victory in federal court is something that's very hard to do.
Yes.
But the idea is that qualified immunity, in a nutshell, it basically allows federal officers immunity from federal civil rights violations if they can show that the same type of thing hasn't happened before.
Yes.
Now, we've all been kicked out of court on qualified immunity, but that doesn't end the story. If you bring state law causes of action like battery, negligence, qualified immunity does not touch those.
Okay.
So you can get knocked out on qualified immunity, but still win your case in a negligence or battery theory.
Yeah.
Qualified immunity in our lifetime is going to change, Daniel. Probably the next 10 years is probably going to change. But that's just one legal hurdle.
Yeah. Now, a lot of times, how we're going to prove it, because sometimes it happens so fast. It could be 20 seconds or 1 minute, and in George Floyd's case, it's 8 minutes. But luckily, he got a videotape. Yesterday, the Supreme Court in California, ruled a case, Darren Burley, the case that, probably you're familiar with this, that, and Associate Justice, Goodwin Liu, and he's saying that, in all likelihood, the only reason Darren Burley is not a household name is that his killing was not caught on videotape as Floyd was. So I think, the videotape play a very important role. In 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and Darren Burley, who was shot by the Area Sheriff Department, was not videotaped. But I think George Floyd, right now, everybody knows the case because caught on videotape. I mean, the case we work on now is a videotape. Now, without the videotape, can we still prove the case?
That one we would have proven anyway, yeah.
Yes.
Now,
how are you going to do it?
We would have proven it, but it's a very good question, Daniel. And
yes.
There is something I got to tell you before we go any further. Between you and me, I tell you this. I still have not watched George Floyd videotape, and I can't watch it. Okay, I know generally what happened. I talk about it, but I cannot watch it all because it's not going to do anything good.
Yes.
I develop over the years. You develop certain things. Okay, if I'm not representing him, if I'm not talking directly about it, I don't need to see it. But we didn't have videotapes for many years. The idea is this. Usually if there's a shooting, now a shooting is my most common case, so I'll talk about that. Usually the only surviving witnesses are law enforcement.
Yes.
So if you start thinking about that, there's no videotape. They're saying your guy did any number of bad things. He had a knife, he reached for a knife. I thought he was going to throw a gun or shoot a gun. I thought he had a bulge in his pocket. There's nothing in his pockets. It looked like he was holding up his pants, and I thought they'll say all of these things. But the way that you defeat them is you have to show what happened to the body. Now, the coroner, the coroner will do an autopsy. And I found in certain counties, the coroners will support the police, but in certain counties, like LA County, they're going to give usually a very honest police autopsy report because they hate seeing death. They hate seeing all these young men come in with bullet holes, and it's the police, and they know it's preventable. It doesn't mean that they're activists. It just means that they're not going to lie.
Yes.
So say you have 10 shots, and some are here, 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 here. And they're saying the person is lunging at them with a knife. Now, Sinawon Priam last year, $9 million verdict against, it was the largest verdict ever against the city of Long Beach. 5'3" Cambodian woman. They shot her up, 5'3". And the officer, there's no videotape, okay? And there's two officers out there, and they're saying that she's lunging at him with a knife. So she was shot 7 times, but of the 7 times, only 2 of the shots were fatal. In other words, she would have survived the other. You know, if you get to medical treatment within 30 minutes, an hour, the ambulance is coming. If no ambulance, forget it. They're all fatal.
Yes.
But the fatal shot went into her buttock.
Okay.
And it traveled upward. And by traveling upward, it showed that she was in the process of falling when she died. And you've got the officer saying that she's lunging at him with a knife, and that's completely inconsistent with the physical evidence. Now, this is 2019, March of 2019.
Yes.
March of 2009 may be a different story.
Yes.
But the jury, and it was all white jury, but they hear that and they go, that doesn't make sense. Now, the other way you win is that the two officers, the officers sometimes work against themselves.
Yes.
So you have one officer in that particular case, in the Priam case, he shoots 7 or 8 times, and the other one shoots 1 time. So you can sometimes hear, you could sometimes hear it on the radio or whatever. And you ask the officer who shot 1 time, why you stop shooting? And you know he has to say, he said, because I didn't see a threat. After I stopped shooting, I didn't see a threat. But after you stop shooting, the other guy's still shooting. So basically what that can mean, what we can show is that at least this one officer didn't see a threat, and the other officer is still shooting, even though there's a threat. So you can do a lot with the physical evidence and the statements that the officers give.
Yes.
You can do a lot with those 2 things to demonstrate that their version doesn't make sense, doesn't add up. And the other thing is that a lot of these officers, you know, if you have a little short time, they'll do okay. They'll answer everything right. But sometimes they have a very aggressive nature.
Yes.
And in the Wang case against Long Beach, the officer who shot the most, there were about 2 or 3 times when I had him up there, he was really getting mad. But not just mad, he was looking at me like he wanted to kill me. And, you know, you could feel it, okay? And you could feel that's probably what she was dealing with.
Yes.
And the jury sees the whole thing happening, but he can't help it. He can't help it because he never thought he would ever be held accountable, ever.
Yes.
But, we asked for a lot of money. The city of Long Beach didn't pay.
Yes.
And the jury wound up awarding twice as much as we asked for.
Now, in this kind of cases, I know that, in the police shooting case, jury probably won't award any like a punitive damage. Why, in this kind of cases, you could achieve $9 million a judgment? Is it because the jury's upset about how the police was trained, or what make the juror would give up the high award?
Well, as a rule, angry juries pay more. Angry jurors will pay more. But sometimes just when you look at just the overall, the completely unnecessary nature of a killing, any person can relate to the loss of human life.
Yes.
And when you say this is completely unnecessary, this person was maybe mentally ill.
Yes.
And so you boil it down, because this person angered you or disobeyed you, she's mentally ill.
Yes.
You have killed this person.
Yes.
Now, if I have a guy who survives, because I represent a lot of folks, sometimes they live. Now, if they live, the jury is looking at them like they're getting paid.
Yes.
But if the person is killed, you see their children, they didn't do anything to anybody. And their kids now don't have a mama. The jury can be sympathetic to the child.
Nice.
But the idea that human life, it's something that can never be replaced, and it is sacred. And human life is the most important thing that we all have. That spark of life, the heart that God gave us, is designed to keep beating no matter what. It's designed that you shoot a bullet through the aorta and through the lungs, there's no more blood, the heart can't work, the body fills with fluid, you die. For what? Because they were not doing what you want them to do? You say drop the knife, a person's mentally ill, they don't understand that. If you say, hey, can I help you? What's happening today? Can we talk? Nobody dies.
Yes.
And so you start seeing what is the price of police aggression.
Yes.
Now you can start to see that this is completely unnecessary. And, they want to make an example sometimes.
Yes.
And award these high damages. Now, me personally, the idea of collecting an officer's paycheck or something, that's not something that I just want to get it for the babies, get the money for the babies, make a deal.
Yes.
If there are ever really going to be some real reforms, Daniel, there have to be criminal prosecutions. It's not just money changing hands. There has to be criminal prosecutions.
Yes. And I think, one of the things Jackie Lacey is facing is that, Black Lives Matter, challenge her, her records of not filing enough lawsuit against criminal charge against the officer involved in shootings. I think one of the things that you could see, with the Black Lives Matters movement going on, do you see that, this juror might be more sympathetic to the victims, more generous, or, because, or what do you think that the direction is going to go in the police shooting case?
I'm glad you asked that, Daniel, because a lot of times I say things that really make people angry. And I say things because I've had the experience.
Yes.
More experience than almost anyone. And I don't have a lot of anger towards Jackie Lacey. Okay. And I'll tell you why. She's a product of the system. There's never been a district attorney. Her predecessor, Steve Cooley, I ran before him, Gil Garcetti.
Yes.
There have never been prosecutions of police. She is the one that is getting attacked, very intensely now.
Yes.
But when you think about it, Daniel, she's the district attorney, and she's got, hundreds of lawyers under her, and they have to work with police. Now, the police union, very strong. And she will never be able to accomplish anything as a district attorney if she alienates the police union. Now, what does that mean? It means that she's in a position where, for political reasons, she's not upholding the oath of office. For political reasons, she's not prosecuting obvious acts of murder. Obvious should at least be voluntary manslaughter. Yes. She's not doing it because the price will be too high for her to pay. Now, why do I have no anger? Because it's the position, it's the way the system is set up. And this is not just LA, this is everywhere.
Yes.
The district attorney's office is damned if they do. If they decide to initiate a prosecution, then the police will, their career's over a lot of times. Yes. Unless it's something really, really obvious. But even in Rodney King, yes, it was a federal government. So the way that this should work, and this is something that Obama was talking about briefly, and I don't think it ever took flight, but there should be an independent federal group of people, a federal agency, yes, that prosecutes police killings under the federal civil rights statutes. And they're independent of the DA, independent of the organizational structure yes, that deals with the police and the DA. The police and the DA, this is someone from the Washington federal, and they have office and they basically prosecute these individuals yes, federally, because all of these shootings can be prosecuted as federal civil rights violations.
I see.
And if that's probably the most workable solution for criminal accountability among police, but it's not something that has been a fact. It's not something that has been important to the politicians in Washington. Yeah, they see soft on crime or whatever it is. And yes, if you're going through election, Mr. Smith voted for a proposal that would say that you should prosecute police. How does that make you feel? Prosecute police. And that person loses the election now. You know, so you have to have a lot of courage, but yes, the district attorney is not the way, in my opinion. That is not the way. They'll prosecute a sex crime now. Yes. We have a lot of, if the officer has sex with a woman against her will, in the jails, if they find the DNA of the officer on the inmate, they'll put him in jail in a heartbeat for a sex crime. Yes. But for a beating or a shooting, that's just not something that can happen. But I look at it. Yeah.
Well, you know, Brian, you're the recommendation coming from you means a lot, because you know that, you know, civil rights violation have been a major problem. I think we will all talk about the police reform, how we're going to reform it. I think you hit the nail on the head that, you know, maybe leave it to the federal agency to prosecute the police shooting case criminally. Yeah, and I think that's something that, you know, they have to do.
Lacey, I mean,
yes,
again,
yes,
I'm neutral. I've known her forever.
Yes.
I know her.
Yes.
I've known her for a long time, and man, she's getting just everywhere she goes. They're at her house the other day. You know, her husband's coming out with a gun. I mean, it's just she is just really the scapegoat for a lot of things that
the system. Yeah,
before she even got there, they blame her for everything.
Yeah.
Now again, would I prosecute? Yeah, I probably would prosecute, but I would never be the DA in the first place.
Yeah,
that's why I would never win, because I would probably bring some of these cases, but we have to look at it, you know, globally. This is a problem that is not going to get fixed overnight.
Yeah. Well, we have a few minutes left. You know, I want to ask you, pick your brain. You know, as you know, what if you're the victim of a police brutality, police shooting case? As a victim, what kind of things we can do to protect our rights?
You should bring a lawsuit. I mean, there should be, there should definitely be a lawsuit. Call you, call me. There are very few lawyers that really know how to do them right, though. And I have learned that, because they call me after the case is completely destroyed. Yes. And I'm like, they want you to come in and save the day. I'm like, oh, you should have done this. You should have done this. You should have done this. You got to call someone who knows it, because it's not like, you know, the people on the billboard, you know, accidentes, or the people, you know, if you've been injured at work, call me, whatever it is. It's a very specialized area, very difficult, very hard. But lawsuits are still the best way right now for the citizen, the consumer, the average person, A lawsuit is still the best way for them to have a voice in the justice.
A lot of times, we think that, hiring a lawyer is very expensive. And in the Chinese media, there's a saying that, you don't fight the government because they could bury you. Now, in this kind of situation, filing a lawsuit, is it very expensive?
No, contingency. In 26 years, I've never asked the client for a check for any reason ever.
We could take on the contingency. I mean, we pay the expert, even we lose, and we bury the cost for the expert. Is that?
Yeah, that's something I've had to do a few times too. Yeah, it's just that's what happens. I mean, but the idea is you stay in business by taking cases that that can be won. But even still, you're going to lose some. It just happens.
Yes.
But the idea is to win the vast majority.
Yes.
And we can't take every case because not every act of excessive force should be a lawsuit. If it's not a lawsuit, there's other things you can do. You can file complaints with the police department.
Okay.
But there should be some action taken always.
Yes. Well, a lot of times, people think that, the government, they would help each other. They would not help other people. But I think, sometimes I encourage people to file, complaint with the FBI, the federal level, or the attorney general. And sometimes I encourage people to go for the congressman or assemblyman because they could help them, if they're a police that having some conflict interest type of things. I remember several years ago, a building inspector in St. Gabriel was acting inappropriate with a homeowner, extorting money and things like that. And they're afraid to call the police because, they say, the police, they're all part of the system.
Right.
But I think later on, they set up a separate operation. They're getting the tax information about the building inspector, things like that. A lot of times, we could use our legal right to protect ourselves. One of the things, was, moving forward, what do you see that, I know that, you've been very successful. Are you going to continue working as a civil rights attorney, or are you going to, you mentioned that you want to, the real lawyers change the world, and what type of things as a civil rights attorney, what kind of things you're proud of?
I just want to be open for whatever God has for me, Daniel. I mean, but there is one thing I want to say before I leave. Things are better now than they were when I started. I first started here in 92, and things are way better now.
Yes.
And the wheels of justice, sometimes it moves slow. It's not overnight it's going to happen. I think in 20 years, it'll be better than it is now. I mean, I believe one day, people will look back at today and they will say, it's barbaric. Yes. It is barbaric how police kill mentally ill people or how police kill people. They will say that about us one day. But to get to that point, you don't just snap your fingers. It happens very slowly. And I can say that we are moving in the right direction, as absurd as it may sound.
Yes.
You have down, you have bad, you have good, you have 2 steps back, 1 step forward, but overall, we're moving in the right direction.
And I'm glad that you are the major player in this kind of movement.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for what you have done for the community, what have you done for the victim of the crime and the victims of police brutality. Thank you, Brian, and look forward to be working with you in many other cases.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Many cases. Take care.
Yes. Take care.
Bye-bye.
好的，谢谢大家收看今天的邓洪说法节目。我们希望将来有请到更多这方面的民权律师，还有各类的律师来跟我们讲解一些美国的一些法律相关的议题。谢谢大家收看今天的邓洪说法节目。